this brings me on to the next part of this topic I wanted to talk about, which was the Elite Ice Hockey League and their 2020/21 season. Now, on our Twitter page, I'm just going to bring up the poll that we ran on Twitter recently. We essentially asked you guys that followed us on Twitter. By the way, do go and follow us at Europuck Podcast. We're posting there a lot at the moment, so do feel free to go and check that out. We essentially asked, do you think that the Elite Ice Hockey League will have a season this year? It's just loading up for a second. Getting a few little technical difficulties here, but we're working through it. We're doing all right. So essentially...
Not only me that's got the slow computer.
Yeah, I know. God, the shoe's on the other foot this time, isn't it, Chris? But essentially we asked, is there going to be an Elite Ice Hockey League season for the 2020/21 season? And then we gave 3 options. Yes, it's going to happen in the proposed December date that we've got, or early December that they're thinking. We put the option, yes, there is one going to happen, but it's going to take place from January 2021 onwards. And then we have the option, no. And as this is loading up, it should be here ever so shortly. Here we go. 28 votes on our very first poll, Chris. That's pretty good. You know, I'm not going to lie. I'm quite happy with that result. 42% of the people said, yes, there is going to be a 2020/21 season for the Elite Ice Hockey League. However, the really important thing to notice is the 28.6% on both yes, but after New Year, and no. So an even voting for the second and third place team. So tied second and the first place. The really interesting thing is there's a lot of concern from fans. Almost half of the people that voted think that the season will either be delayed or there won't be a season at all. Now, Chris has kind of alluded to it somewhat in what he was talking about earlier. The fact that, you know, you've got players that are leaving the league because they don't know if there's going to be a season this year. They have to make the decision by the end of August, which will be quite soon after this episode goes up. So within our second episode, we can have a big chat about whether the Elite League goes on or not. So there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of strange times happening at the moment. Chris, do you think the people that voted yes are kind of being hopeful and kind of voting yes because they want a season to happen? Or do you think that they genuinely think, you know what, things are going to get figured out by then? Because obviously you've mentioned it slightly, the caveat that whilst teams only pay their players for the season as opposed to the entire year, the Elite League couldn't possibly run given the way attendance is for sports venues at this moment in time. Obviously, governments are wanting to be a lot safer and make it as safe and as healthy as possible for people to attend events. If we don't have arenas at as high capacity as they can be, sort of 80 to 100%, this league is not going to be financially viable next season, and we could see more harm than good. And also, not even talking about the possibility of there being a second wave and everything having to be shut down. So, Chris, when we look at the Elite Ice Hockey League, obviously it's very personal to us because it's our domestic league. Do you genuinely think that there is going to be a 2020/21 season?
Well, put it this way. I voted no on the poll.
Okay, interesting.
There are many reasons for this, and I could probably quite happily talk for about 10 minutes about it.
Go for it.
So, let's start with point 1. The league have said that, well, the owners have said, particularly Neil Black, the owner of the Nottingham Panthers and the Glasgow Clan, have said we need about 2 months notice of the start of a season to get fixtures sorted, rinks booked, player visas sorted, pre-season, training, all the rest of it. And so we need about 2 months. So if we're going for early December, that means that in early October, the league needs to come out and say, we are definitely having a season. A problem with that is this potential of, well, not even the potential of a second wave, but the problem with that is social distancing.
Yeah.
Now, Neil Black was quite open and said that they'd been in a lot of discussions with the National Ice Centre in Nottingham, the my local one and the team I cover, and they've said that in order to make a game financially viable in terms of player wages, hiring the rink cost, all the rest of it, to have sales on the tickets greater than that, to make a game viable, you need 80% capacity to make a game viable.
Right.
Now, the arena have come back and said to the Panthers, with 2 meter social distancing and kind of going off roughly kind of groups of 3, 2 parents and a kid, something along those lines, you could get about a third. So they're about 33% capacity.
Oh, yeah.
And they really need about 80%.
Oh,
so in
God.
order to have a league which is viable, we're talking no social distancing.
Yeah.
Now, to have no social distancing, we need no second wave. We probably need a vaccine, let's be honest.
Yeah.
We need no social distancing. We need no jumping cases, no second wave, probably a vaccine. Bearing in mind, this is going to be winter as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all those factors to conjure up. Now, at the moment, the league is okay because it's kind of in limbo. As I alluded to earlier, the teams aren't having to pay players at the minute. They've got some decisions in principle, but they're not having to pay the players. The problem is going to arise if the league comes out and says, right, we're having a season, and then all the teams pay the players, get squads together. You've also got the added complication of players coming in from abroad, particularly in this time. It's difficult enough anyway to get like the work visas. But particularly at this time, it's going to be even harder. Mm-hmm. What they don't want to do is to spend the money on the players and then the government say, right, we've got to go back into a lockdown. We're shutting the rinks down again. You can't play.
Yeah.
Because then the teams have spent the money.
Yeah.
And it's that which is the danger, because that, if they're spending the money on the players and they're not getting it back in the ticket sales, that is what will stop the teams and will cause them to fold, because they won't have the funds and they'll go bankrupt. So it's better really to not have the season at all, keep the teams in limbo where, yes, they're not making any money, but they're not losing any money.
Yeah.
What the problem is that because they need 8 weeks notice, you're relying on, in those 8 weeks, nothing changing, the government not changing, saying we've got to go back into lockdown and what have you. And I mean, we know from the news, like every other day, there seems to be a change in rules. Some areas gone into a lockdown, some hasn't. I mean, just take, so Manchester's in a local lockdown at the moment. So what happens when you're meant to play the Manchester Storm?
Yeah, it's a fair point.
What if Nottingham goes into a lockdown?
And especially because a lot of the teams are sort of further north of the country to where I am, for example, and they're a lot of the areas that are having these lockdowns. So we might be in a position where Nottingham or Sheffield, or like you say, like Manchester's locked down, and then we're in the position that they might be locked down for 2 weeks, they might be locked down for 6 weeks, depending on how the virus is kept and of how the virus moves about between the people in like Manchester or one of those places. What if it then goes up to Scotland and we have issues in Scotland? What if it just kind of doesn't seem feasible given everything that's going on, does it, Chris?
No. So for those reasons, that's why I voted no.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd like there to be a season.
Of course.
From a selfish point of view, it means it's because I've got work and I get paid. But from even from a fan point of view, I mean, I'd like there to be a season, but I think it's just too high of a risk, because it's not like the NHL and it's not like football over here in the UK. There isn't a massive TV deal which is going to keep the teams afloat.
No.
There isn't that here. The money coming in is from sponsors. Well, they're not going to sponsor the team if there's no fans to see the sponsors on the jerseys and on the ice. And the ticket sales. Well, if we can't have a crowd in, there's no ticket sales.
Yeah, exactly.
So for those kind of primary reasons, I think it's too risky. The only way I can see it is if there's a vaccine and no social distancing.
Exactly. And also, some people might argue, just do it in a bubble. That would be completely impossible to do. I mean, sure, some people might make the argument, well, playoff weekend takes place with all the teams going down to Nottingham. Why not just keep them all in Nottingham? Like, that just seems like so much of a problem. Like, the NHL, for example, are doing it in a bubble because they're finishing off the season. Do you think they're going to do it in a bubble for the entirety of the 2020/21 season? That might not be feasible. It might be an option, but they also have millions and millions and millions of dollars that they can pump into it. whereas the Elite League doesn't. So it just kind of seems like that they don't want to bite off more than they can chew. And I think if they try and rush ahead and try and kind of keep fans happy by saying, yeah, we've got a season, you guys will be fine, some of you will be able to see it, some of you won't, it just won't work out in the long run. And like you say, if there's the possibility of there's no vaccine and social distancing is still in place for the entirety of the season potentially, or we're in a position where a second wave happens, we could have the possibility of the Elite League going under completely. So it's either do we kind of cut our losses in this year, kind of see if we can get some funding from the government to keep us afloat, see if we can kind of ride this out once everything kind of goes back to normal, more back to normal than it is already. We can then bring everything back for the 2021/22 season if that's a possibility, or do we try and keep going and risk the possibility of everything going wrong? Isn't it really?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the league's long-term future, they need to err on the side of caution. Yes,
Exactly.
okay, short-term, it might hurt the league a bit to not have a season at all, but I would rather not have a season this year and it almost be like an NHL lockout and have subsequent seasons than make wrong decisions, or in my view, wrong decisions to try and get something of a season on this year. The government have to make a decision to close things down again towards the winter. The clubs go bankrupt, and then we have like 5-6 teams, and we haven't really got enough to make a league going forward.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is the British system has been through that before several times where a lot of teams are financially strapped for cash. There's only 5-6 teams in the league. We're now actually starting to see the British Elite Ice Hockey League having a bit of a foundation underneath them, so everything's not going to completely implode on itself if something does arise.
I mean, I can count Edinburgh Capitals, Hull Stingrays, Newcastle Vipers, Manchester Phoenix. And those are teams that have gone since I started watching ice hockey, so in the last 15, 16 years or so.
Yeah.
And I've probably missed ones off that as well. Those are the 4 that spring to mind. So you're talking a team going bust every 4 years.
Which is crazy. Absolutely crazy. And obviously hockey is not a cheap sport to put on. It's a very expensive endeavor. Add to that there's certain costs in terms of being a member of the Elite Ice Hockey League and getting players in. Like the cost is exponential for a UK hockey team before they were even thinking about the roster. They've got to figure out the rink and they've got to figure out the operations and get themselves into the league and then pay for players. You're talking hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds, aren't you, Chris?
Well, yeah. I mean, so Neil Black was very open in his interview, and he said, if you put in the games we missed at the end of the season, bearing in mind it was only about 3-4 weeks worth of games.
Yeah.
To the end of last season. So let's say 4 or 5 home games plus playoff finals weekend. And he said that cost the Panthers about £250,000.
Yeah, obviously playoff weekend is a big factor into that because that's the league's big money maker. But yeah, I get what you mean.
But then don't forget that the money from that is split between the teams.
Fair, yeah. Good point.
So you're still talking kind of £30,000, £40,000 a game that you're losing by not having that fixture. So they just can't afford to scale that up from a season. If you take, say, 40,000, and that's a rough estimate, I've got no kind of figures backing that up other than trying to divide the number of games that are left. You're talking 40,000 by, let's say, it's 54 games a season, so that's 27 plus Challenge Cup, let's say 30 to make the maths easy. That's 1.2 million.
Yep.
The clubs can't. Some of the clubs, like Fife, for example, their arena only holds about 1,500. Cardiff holds 2,500. They can't afford it.
No, and like we said, it might be worth it in the long run to go, look, we need to cut our losses this year. We're going to make a loss this year. We're going to have to postpone the season, but it will mean in the long run we can be more financially stable and we'll have a lot of fans. There could also be the concern that fans might lose interest in the Elite League, but I don't think hockey fans are like that. I think they'll be more excited than ever for the Elite League to come back if they had to postpone due to the current situation. But I mean, we could talk about this for another 30, 40
Yeah,
minutes.
we could. We need to move on.
Obviously, given the fact that we're going to hear some news, hopefully, by the end of this month and by the time we record our second episode of this show, we could talk about it in more detail, or the updates or anything else. Any other thoughts that we had on it, any thoughts that you give us on Twitter or on the YouTube channel, any comments from this episode, do let us know. We'll, for sure, we love to talk about the Elite League and kind of what happens. This podcast is in some ways also a way for us to kind of vent about what is going on in our league as well, because we're not so lucky compared to some of the other leagues. We don't have this rock solid infrastructure in place. We're very much more journeyman teams coming in and out of the league every few years or so. Some of the big teams earning lots of money, so, like Chris mentioned, some of the other teams more sort of minor league teams, or even the minor league team of a minor league team, you know. So it'll be interesting to see how things figure out.